Call the roll.
Senate roll call, day 15, Monday, February 3rd, 2025. Anderson?
Here.
Barlow?
Present.
Boner? Brennan? Here. Case?
Present.
Cooper?
Here.
Crago?
Here.
Crum? Dockstetter? Driscoll?
Here.
French?
Here.
Guru?
Here.
Hicks?
Here.
Hutchings? Ide?
Here.
Jones? Kolb?
Present.
Landon?
Here.
Larson?
Here.
McEwen?
Here.
Nethercott? Olson?
Here.
Pappas?
Here.
Pearson? Rothfuss?
Here.
Salazar?
Here.
Schuler? Scott?
Here.
Smith?
Here.
Steinmetz? President Beitman?
Here.
Mr. President, 31 present.
Thank you, Ellen. Our chaplain of the day is Pastor Blake Denlinger from Northwoods Presbyterian Church in Cheyenne. Pastor, please lead us in the prayer.
Let us pray. Almighty God, the blessed and only sovereign, the King of kings and Lord of lords, to whom belong eternal dominion and honor. All authority on earth flows from you, and these authorities have been instituted by you. Thank you for gathering these men and women here today to do the work of government. Thank you for gathering them to serve you for the good of the people of Wyoming. Thank you for those who serve, for their willingness to do this hard work of government, which can be tedious, frustrating, and little appreciated, even when it is done very well. Give them all that they need to do this work well today: courage, wisdom, integrity. Give them insight into the heart of the issues that are before them and endurance through the long hours of work that they do. Guard them against all the corruptions that could tempt them in the offices that they hold, and guide them instead faithfully to serve those whom they represent. Give success to the labors of this chamber today for the good of those they serve. And all this I pray in the name of Jesus Christ, the Master who washed his disciples' feet, the King who bore the cross, who has all might and majesty in himself, but who came not to be served, but to serve, and give his life as a ransom for many. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor. Senator Larson, will you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Reading correction, approval of journal. Will the reading clerk please read the journal committee report?
Mr. President, your journal committee reports that the journal of January 31, 2025 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Senator Crum, Chairman.
Are there any objections? Hearing none, the report is adopted. Well done, Senator Crum. Let's see here. There is no doctor of the day. Be careful. Today in history, in 1959, Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper died in a plane crash known as the day the music died. Samuel Clemens began penning as Mark Twain. A quote for the day: this is your Monday morning reminder that you can handle whatever this week throws at you. Unknown. The dad joke of the day: why was the broom late for school on Monday? He overslept. And the announcement that groundhog did not see his shadow. I don't know. He said 6 more weeks of winter, as always. But not Lander. What's his name? Lander. Lil. Well, you know, the groundhog, I looked at his stats. He's 3 out of the last 10 years he's been right. So if he was a baseball player, he'd be batting 300. He'd be signing a $100 million contract, an all-star. If he was a surgeon, he'd be getting sued for malpractice. So keep that in perspective. Senators, here's an announcement. If any of you went home over the weekend, please remember to go in and sign the mileage book so you can get paid. Says in parentheses for you, Senator Anderson, so I'm looking at you, Mr. Chairman. All right, gang, we have greatness in the building. Sheridan football team, 4A state champs, the Sheridan Broncs are in the house. Let me tell you about these Broncs. It is with great pride and honor that we welcome Coach Jeff Mowry, the head football coach of the Sheridan High School Broncs. Under Coach Mowry's exceptional leadership, the Sheridan High School Broncs have achieved remarkable success, winning 5 state championships, including 4 in a row in 2021, 22, 23, and 24. Today, he brings assistant coach Kevin Reiser and the following seniors with him: Ty Gilbertson, Bridger Peldo, and Garrett Way. Fellow Senators, please join me in extending a warm welcome to these distinguished guests. Coach Mowry.
Mr. President, Wyoming Senators, really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you this morning. We're humbled and honored to be recognized for the few accomplishments of our football team. This season and the past few seasons, as I've mentioned, have been ones to remember. First and foremost, I want to thank you for the support that you provide Wyoming Public Schools. And in my opinion, there's not a better investment in the state of Wyoming than fine young men like these. These are great people that are going to go on to do great things in the state of Wyoming. I also want to thank Sheridan County School District 2, we have some representatives, our superintendent in the gallery tonight, or to this morning. Without their leadership, Sheridan High School football wouldn't be what it is today. We've had an incredible run of success, and oftentimes I get asked, or just next door a little bit ago, what's the secret sauce? What's happening in Sheridan? Why are you winning 8 out of the last 10 state championships? Well, these 3 young men represent a senior class that only lost 1 game through their high school career, and that was when they were freshmen. They weren't even on the field. These guys right here have had 47 wins and 1 loss. They've won 4 state championships in the 4A and have led our program to a current 43-game win streak that hopefully we can continue. In my opinion, the reasons we've been so successful in Sheridan is not because of the individual talents or better facilities or anything that's better than anywhere else in the state. It's because the young men on our Sheridan Bronc football team believe in the philosophy that when you put others before yourself, great things happen. As coaches, we ask our teams to be selfless, servant leaders that look out for the benefit of others before looking out for themselves. This is a challenging philosophy, especially to sell to a bunch of teenage young men. They see loads of selfishness in the media and in professional sports. But these young men have bought into our philosophy, and it's paid off for them. And without me talking a little bit more, I'm going to invite these young men to come up and share a little bit about what they've done, what they're going to do when they leave Sheridan High School, and what they're taking away from Sheridan High School football. First, I'm going to bring up Ty Gilbertson. He's our quarterback, conference player of the year, offensive player of the year, plays defensive back, and was a kicker and punter for us. So Ty Gilbertson.
Thank you guys for having us. It's a super cool honor to be here. Like Coach Meyer said, my name's Ty. My plans for next year are to attend Montana Tech in Butte, Montana, and study civil engineering and play football there. My favorite memory as a Bronc, my dad was a coach, and so I've grown up in the program, so just being around all the coaches. But my sophomore year, I had the opportunity to play with my brother and win a state championship with him, and my dad being the coach, so that was definitely one of my favorite things. And then one thing I've learned as a Bronc is just to believe in yourself and have that trust in yourself and go play with confidently and do what you can do. The coaches wouldn't put you out there if you couldn't do it. So to believe in yourself and believe in the guys next to you, and then believe in what the coaches are doing.
Next, we have Bridger Peldo. Bridger Peldo, if you couldn't tell, is the anchor to our offensive line. And every parent that had a running back or a quarterback loves Bridger Peldo because he just made holes for them. And so Bridger Peldo.
Thank you for having us. As Coach Mowry said, I'm Bridger Peldo. I played offensive line for the Broncs the past 3 years. For my future, I'm planning on going to Northern State University in Aberdeen, South Dakota to play football. And I'm also looking to pursue a degree in business and finance to be a financial advisor. My favorite memory as a Bronc is getting able to play with my younger brother Fisher, my cousin Levi, and my cousin Caden, and being able to win state championships with all of them. And my favorite lesson that these coaches have taught me is to love your teammates like brothers. I've been able to carry this with me throughout various different sports that I've participated in at the high school, and I've been able to become friends and great teammates with many kids that I would have never thought that I'd be friends with. So thank you.
It's also Bridger's 18th birthday today, so he got to come to Cheyenne. Yeah. Next, we have running back and linebacker Garrett Way, who joined us as a junior to play football for the Sheridan Broncs. Wasn't able to play before that, joined us as a junior, and then his senior campaign became the co-defensive player of the year in 4A. So Garrett Way.
Thank you all for having us here to recognize us. For my future plans, I just recently graduated high school at the end of the fall semester. I'm on track to graduate with my associate's degree from Sheridan College this spring in plant sciences. I'm going to take a year to join the workforce and gain some experience before I'll attend another 2 years of school to get my bachelor's degree in agronomy. I've been very lucky and very grateful to be a part of this Bronc program for the last 2 years. I'd say my favorite memory was after this year's state championship, just getting to celebrate with all the guys and just celebrate the results of all our hard work throughout that season. After we were done getting dressed and about to load the buses, me and my other running back, Kelton Crow, and one of the receivers, Carson Chase, we walked back out onto War Memorial Field when it was empty and just kind of looked around and took in the moment, knowing that it was our last high school football game and possibly our last football game altogether. But I think the most valuable lesson that I've learned from being a Bronc is to trust in your teammates and the people you're working with around you, to just focus on the job that you were given and do it to the best of your ability, and trust that your teammates are going to do the same. And we've had a lot of success with that mantra of just trusting the outcome will be what it should be if you do your job and you trust your teammates to do theirs. So thank you.
Also with these young men today is Coach Kevin Reiser. Coach Kevin Reiser joined the Sheridan staff in 2007 and is a phenomenal offensive line coach. He is a tremendous mentor for these young men that builds a culture of what our team expects. Very, very glad to have him join us. We won't take much more of your time as you have a lot of work to do, but I just want to thank you for the opportunity to bring these fine young men that represent the Sheridan High School football team very well. They're a great group of men that have accomplished great things on the football field, but their best is yet to come. They understand what it means to be a leader and what it takes to be a great leader. They understand that they've got to give back before they receive. Thank you for allowing us to be here today, and thank you for what you do. Go Broncs.
Well, coaches, you know, your record speaks for itself, but the fact that you're producing such fine young men and student athletes really says it all. You guys are a class act organization, and you're producing some of the finest next generation for Wyoming citizens. So thank you. Wish you all the best, and do it one more time. How about that? One more round of applause. Thank you. All right. Yes, Madam Floor Leader. Yes, floor is yours.
Mr. President, I'd like to call Coach Mowry back in if we can to the Senate.
Coach, you're not done yet. Paging Coach Mowry.
Good Wyoming senators and members of the public, Coach Mowry and I share a long history together, which is a wonderful Wyoming story. We've known each other our whole lives, having ridden bikes in the small town of Pinedale, Wyoming as children, gone to Pinedale Elementary together, and then our families both moved to the wonderful town of Riverton, where we graduated high school together. And he led our football team to state championship at that time as well. Coach Mowry has exhibited a life of public service and leadership, and no doubt it's not a surprise that he continues to lead the young men of our state. He is a Riverton High School graduate. I see the Riverton School Board members in attendance as well. And we represent together a wonderful Wyoming story of a lifetime of friendship. His brother and I went to law school together and now practice together at the same firm. And that, good colleagues, is a Wyoming story of Wyoming families. And we are so proud of you, Coach Mowry. Keep doing what you do.
All right. Let's do Senator Barlow first here.
Mr. President, privilege of the floor.
Yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we celebrate athletic successes, scholastic successes, and where that takes place is in local school districts, in our communities, with dedicated teachers, dedicated administration, and those elected trustees who are the guardians of that sacred trust that we put on them. So if you will help me, I know there's lots of folks who probably want to introduce their individual boards, but let's do a collective welcome to school board members from across Wyoming and thank them for their service and dedication to the youth of our communities. Please stand.
Here, here. School boards, please stand. Welcome to the Senate, and thank you all for what you do. It is a thankless job, I know, and we appreciate you. Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. President. The good senator took away I wanted to give one more shout out to our school board members, so I decided I would. If I could have privilege of the floor, please.
It is great.
I just wanted to let everyone know that this is Wyoming School Board's Appreciation Week. And a lot of your folks came down here and took the opportunity to sit through Education Committee this morning. And I told them that they have the most thankless job on the whole planet. And even though we do appreciate them, they do take a lot of baloney quite often. So I just want to, again, reaffirm that these locally elected representatives, they devote time and energy to Wyoming's public schools. They ensure that every student benefits from a quality education. As locally elected officials, school board members provide important leadership for our educational system. So let's just go ahead and thank them one more time for their work, their leadership, and their service to Wyoming students. Thank you.
Hear, hear. There we go. One last announcement. Budget amendments are due by the end of Committee of the Whole today, and they need to be approved by 10 a.m. tomorrow. You've been duly warned. Senator Hicks.
President, I'm assuming that's just second reading amendments to the
Second reading budget amendment.
Thank you.
You bet. All right, that takes care of the announcements. Do we have any committee reports? None? No messages from the House? All right, we'll go straight to third reading. Bills on third reading and final passage. Madam Majority Floor Leader, do we have a consent list?
We do, Mr. President, and I move the third reading consent list as follows. Good senators, this is the longest consent list I've seen. We have Senate File 65, Data Privacy Government Entities, Senate File 82, Omnibus Water Bill Planning, Senate File 86, Alternative Teaching Certificate, Senate File 88, 2025 Large Project Funding, Senate File 91, Petroglyph, Pictograph, and Historic Inscription Protection, Senate File 97, Trust Code Revisions, Senate File 108, Recreation Safety Agritourism, Senate File 110, Inclusion of Crossing Guards for Governmental Claims Act, Senate File 113, Raider Opportunity Act, Senate File 116, Anti-Money Laundering, Senate File 119, Expedited Professional Licensure for Military Members, Senate File 120, Wyoming Prime Act, Senate File 121, Rodeo License Plate, Senate File 130, Emergency Assistance Immunity Mental Health Services, Senate File 131, Charter School Leasing, Senate File 135, Defense of State Banking 1, Senate File 138, Energy Impact on Wyoming Economy Study, Senate File 144, Wyoming-Ireland Trade Commission. Senate File 146, Consumer Rental Purchase Agreement Act Amendments. Senate File 147, Service Dogs Training and Crimes. And Senate Joint Resolution 7, NCSL 50th Anniversary.
Thank you. Would anybody like any of these bills removed from the consent list? Senator Scott.
Senate File 116, anti-money laundering, please, Mr. President.
Okay, Senate File 116 has been removed from the consent list. Any others? I'm seeing none. Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the Senate? Senate File 65, Senate File 65, data privacy, government entities. Senate File 82, omnibus water bill planning. Senate File 86, alternative teaching certificate. Senate File 88, 2025, large project funding. Senate File 91, petroglyph, pictograph, and historic inscription protection. Senate File 97, trust code revisions. Senate File 108, recreation, safety, agro-tourism. Senate File 110, inclusion of crossing guards for Governmental Claims Act. Senate File 113, Brader Opportunity Act. Senate File 119, expedited professional licensure for military members. Senate File 120, Wyoming Prime Act. Senate File 121, rodeo license plate. Senate File 130, emergency assistance, immunity, mental health services. Senate File 131, charter school leasing. Senate File 135, defense of state banking 1. Senate File 138, energy impact on Wyoming economy study. Senate File 144, Wyoming-Ireland Trade Commission. Senate File 146, Consumer Rental Purchase Agreement Act amendments. Senate File 147, Service Dogs, Training and Crimes, and Senate Joint Resolution 7, NCSL 50th Anniversary. Will the reading clerk please call the roll?
On the consent list, Anderson. Barlow. Boner. Brennan. Case. Cooper. Craigo. Crum. Dockstader. Driscoll. French. Guru. Hicks. Hutchings. Ide. Jones. Kolb. Landon. Larson. McEwen. Nethercott. Olson. Pappas. Pearson. Rothfuss. Salazar. Schuler. Scott. Smith. Steinmetz. President Beitman.
Aye.
On the consent list, 31 aye. Senate File 65. Are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing vote closed. Senate File 65, 31 aye. Senate File 82, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing vote closed. Senate File 82, 31 aye. Senate File 86, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing vote closed. Senate File 86, 31 aye. Senate File 88, are there any changes? Aye. Aye to no.
Beitman, no.
Beitman, no. McEwen, no. Pearson, no. Smith, no. Hutchings, no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 88, 25 aye, 6 no. Senate File 91, are there any changes? Aye. Aye to no. Steinmetz? Aye to no. McEwen? Aye to no. Closing vote. Oh, Pearson? Aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 91, 27 aye, 4 no. Senate File 97, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Sorry. Senate File 97, 31 aye. Senate File 108, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 108, 31 aye. Senate File 110, are there any changes? Aye. Aye to no. Steinmetz? Aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 110, 29 aye, 2 no. Senate File 113, are there any changes? Jones? Aye to no. Anderson? Aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 113, 29 aye, 2 no. Senate File 119, are there any changes? Case, aye to no. Closing vote. Hutchings, aye to no. Larson, aye to no. Rothfuss, aye to no. Pearson, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 119, 26 aye, 5 no. Senate File 120, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 120, 31 aye. Senate File 121, are there any changes? Aye. Aye to no. Larson? Aye to no. Case, I to know. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 121, 28 aye, 3 no. Senate File 130, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 130, 31 aye. Senate File 131, are there any changes? Case, I to know. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 131, 30 aye, 1 no. Senate File 135, are there any changes? Case, I to know. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 135, 30 aye, 1 no. Senate File 138, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 138, 31 aye. Senate File 144, are there any changes? Aye. Aye to no, Hutchings. Aye to no, Kolb. Aye to no, Steinmetz. Aye to no, Pearson. Aye to no, French. Aye to no, Scott. No. Smith. No. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 144, 23 aye, 8 no. Senate File 146, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 146, 31 aye. Senate File 147, are there any changes? Case, I to know. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 147, 30 aye, 1 no. And lastly, Senate Joint Resolution Number 7. Are there any changes? Pearson, aye to no. Steinmetz, aye to no. Ide, aye to no. Larson, aye to no. French, aye to no. McEwen, aye to no. Hutchings, Hutchings, no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate Joint Resolution Number 7, 24 aye, 7 no.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 65, Data Privacy Government Entities, Senate File 82, Omnibus Water Bill Planning, Senate File 86, Alternative Teaching Certificate, Senate File 88, 2025 Large Project Funding, Senate File 91, Petroglyph, Pictograph, and Historic Inscription Protection, Senate File 97, Trust Code Revisions, Senate File 108, Recreation, Safety, Agro-Tourism, Senate File 110, Inclusion of Crossing Guards for Governmental Claims Act, Senate File 113, Brader Opportunity Act, Senate File 119, Expedited Professional Licensure for Military Members, Senate File 120, Wyoming Prime Act, Senate File 121, Rodeo License Plate, Senate File 130, Emergency Assistance, Immunity, Mental Health Services, Senate File 131, Charter School Leasing, Senate File 135, Defensive State Banking 1, Senate File 138, Energy Impact on Wyoming Economy Study, Senate File 144, Wyoming Ireland Trade Commission, Senate File 146, Consumer Rental Purchase Agreement Act Amendments, Senate File 147, Service Dogs, Training and Crimes, and Senate Joint Resolution 7, NCSL 50th Anniversary have passed the Senate. Bills on third reading. Senator Scott.
Mr. President, on one of the bills that you just announced has passed, the Senate File 120 Wyoming Prime Act. Mr. President, in committee of the whole, I declared a conflict of interest in that bill. I do in fact have a conflict of interest in that bill. And frankly, I lost my place and didn't, although having marked it as one I needed to change, I didn't get the job done. So I wish to acknowledge that and apologize to the Senate. It was not intentional, it was a mistake, but I should have been a conflict on that one.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Duly noted. Bills on third reading. Senate File 64, third reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 64, Wyoming opposes mandatory electronic ID devices, livestock, sponsored by Senator Steinmetz, an act relating to agriculture.
There is an amendment. Would the reading clerk please read it in?
Senate File 64, third reading amendment number 1, page 5 after line 23, insert.
Senator Crago.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 64. Ask for the body's favorable consideration. During committee, we heard a little bit of testimony from our state veterinarian that there was some concern with our local vets that this might inhibit or affect their ability to write health certificates for animals that are leaving the state and visiting with the sponsor. Just wanted to make sure that that's not the intent of the bill, and that's all this amendment does, just make sure that our local vets can continue to write certificates for all of our producers and horse owners, et cetera. I'd stand for any questions.
Any questions? Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a good amendment. Vote aye, please.
Okay, been asked to vote aye. Ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Craig's motion to adopt third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 64, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The amendment has been adopted. We're back on the bill. You ready for the question? Sounds like it. All right. Senate File 64 having been read 3 separate times. The question is, shall the bill pass? The chief clerk will call the roll.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 64. Anderson? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Boner? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Crago? Aye. Crum? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. French? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Cole? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? I. Nethercott? I. Olson? I. Pappas? I. Pearson? I. Rothfuss? I. Salazar? I. Schuler? I. Scott? I. Smith? I. Steinmetz? I. President Beitman?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate file 64, 30 aye, 1 no.
Senate File 64, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 64 has passed the Senate. Senate File 69, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 69, Homeowner Property Tax Exemption, sponsored by the Revenue Committee, an act relating to taxation.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, absent any objection, I would request to lay Senate File 69 homeowner property tax exemptions back for 1 day.
Absent objection, Senate File 69 has been laid back for 1 additional day. Senate File 107, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 107, Freedom to Work and to Build Business, sponsored by Senator Nethercott, an act relating to miscellaneous contracts and actions.
There is an amendment. Would the reading clerk please read in the amendment?
Senate File 107, third reading amendment number 1, page 2.
Senator Larson.
Mr. President, thank you. I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 107. And good members, this is a good bill. This just gives the employer a little bit more relief if they've given the employee a little money for education, or if they relocated them to their town and such. So at 2 years, the employee would need to return 100% of that expense. At 2 to 3 years, it'd be 66% of that expense. And on between 3 and 4 years, it'd be 33%. So just help the employer a little bit if they're forking out some money.
Any discussion on the amendment? Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Voted up, voted down, no objection to the amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Any discussion? Ready for the question? Lively bunch this morning. All those in favor of Senator Larson's motion to adopt third reading amendment number 1, the Senate File 107, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. The amendment has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Any discussion on the bill? Yes, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think, as I said before, I think this is a well-intended bill. I just want to express why I'm against the bill. I mean, there again, it just inserts the government into the free market, and these are voluntary contracts. So anyway, I like the bill, but I just don't like the government intervention in this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Nethercott.
Mr. President, thank you. The concerns of the good senator are valid. This is a profound policy change for the state of Wyoming. However, I think it protects the free market by allowing employees the freedom to work and build competing businesses, providing for a more competitive marketplace, and not trapping what are typically unsophisticated employees who are earning minimum wage to $15 an hour, who I don't believe really have the equal bargaining position of where they can be employed. And then when they get terminated from that employer or they leave their employment, don't have the ability to work within their communities and feed their families. And so I think enough is enough for this practice. I think it's time to allow business to be competitive and to compete with each other, and allow these employees and these professionals to really compete in a fair marketplace. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Let's go to Senator Scott.
And Mr. President, agreeing with all that was just said, but further pointing out that in the healthcare area in particular, we have found that these non-compete agreements get us into real trouble with healthcare professions when somebody wants to stay in a community as the community is providing a service the community very much needs, and then are forced out by a monopolistic healthcare provider. And so this bill helps us get better healthcare services, Mr. President. So again, on and for the bill.
Senator Kolb.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Still on and for the bill, even after that amendment. I think the amendment weakened the bill a bit, but it's still a fundamental change for the rights of folks in this state to seek employment. So still in favor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Anybody else? Senator Smith.
Mr. President, I'm on and for this bill. I think it is about the Constitution, and it's about a right to work and not to be impeded. And these non-competes have just gotten too aggressive, and it's no longer about free market. It's about big corporations oppressing the little guy. So on and for this bill, 100%.
Thank you. Who else wishes to speak? Anybody for their second time? Are you ready for the question? Question being called. Senate File 107 having been read 3 separate times. The question is, shall the bill pass the Senate? The chief clerk will call the roll.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 107. Anderson? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Boner? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Crago? Aye. Crum? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. French? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? No. Jones? Aye. Cole? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Olson? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Pearson? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Smith? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Biteman?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 107, 30 aye, 1 no.
Senate File 107 having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate. Senate File 107 has passed the Senate. Senate File 112, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 112, Anesthesiologist Assistance Licensing, sponsored by Senator Schuler, an act relating to professions and occupations.
There is an amendment. Would the reading clerk please read in the amendment?
Senate File 112, third reading amendment number 1, page 5.
Senator Scott.
Mr. President, move adoption of the amendment. Mr. President, when we heard this bill in committee, there was considerable opposition to the bill. This is a bill on the allowance of the anesthesia assistants to practice in the state. There was opposition to the bill from the nurse anesthetists, and the issue was over whether or not, if this thing was a good idea, it was going to expand the ability of the anesthesiologist to take care of more patients. And there was a suggestion from a different committee member who had a thought that I also had but hadn't articulated. Said, well, why not let the nurse anesthetists supervise these new assistants? And that would enable us to meet some of our medical personnel difficulties that we really have. And that made a lot of sense to me. So I developed this amendment, Mr. President, and it does what it does is allows the anesthesiologists are allowed to supervise 4, the nurse anesthetists are allowed to supervise 2, really because they work in places that don't do has quite the volume, so 2 works. And it's a little different standard, but otherwise the supervision and requirements are just the same. You go through the Board of Nursing, you lead the Board of Medicine with the primary licensing responsibility and have them consult with the nursing board as appropriate. And this removed, Mr. President, that source of opposition to this bill. And then that touched off. It works fine for all the Wyoming parties. Were friendly to it, but the national parties were not. And like many of these health professions, the licensure, it's just like a trade union and it's craft working rules. Exactly like that, and they're trying to restrict who can do what for economic reasons. The first thing we heard was that CMS wouldn't allow it. This amendment allows, if that were true, that we could make an exception for the ones that CMS is paying for, in Medicare in particular, but still get the ball rolling on expanding here. Mr. President, that's worthwhile. It takes care of that objection. And now I hear that one of the national boards involved in certifying the nurse anesthetist would object. Mr. President, I suspect that they would have antitrust problems if they did so, given the precedent on the North Carolina dentist case, Mr. President. But be it as it may, that is a national problem. Let's do what's right for Wyoming and allow the nurse anesthetist to supervise. That will get us additional medical help that we really need. So, Mr. President, on for the amendment.
Thank you, Senator. Discussion? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask you to push back against this amendment. We've had discussions during the committee, after the committee. The good senator and I spoke this morning. It was a novel idea that was brought up by someone. Why can't our CRNAs, supervise the AAs? The problem is it's illegal, and it's illegal for a number of different reasons, and I'll just mention a couple here. That proposal would be a violation of federal rules, and it would expose our hospitals, our surgical centers, and our medical groups to the federal False Claims Acts. And that could have some monetary and criminal penalties. And that's why this particular thing has not been implemented in any other state. Now, Arizona, the Southwest state, one of our Southwest states did try to implement this and found out the same thing. And if you're really bored, you can go into the CMS handbook where it starts on page 105 and talk about anesthesia and what CMS allows and what they don't allow. CMS and major insurance companies, they do not reimburse for this. The CMS COP, which is conditions of participation, clearly defines an anesthesiologist assistant, and they do allow them to be, they don't allow them to be directed by anyone other than an anesthesiologist. So CMS uses the term quite often throughout this part. They talk about non-physician providers, and that classifies both CAAs and CRNAs. There is no model for a non-physician provider to supervise another, and that's very similar to the arguments that there are no models out there for nurse practitioners to supervise PAs. This is not something that can be done at the state level. So, and then on top of it, as the good senator mentioned, the certifying body, which is the NCCAA, sorry, not sports, they don't allow the AAs to practice under anyone other than a physician anesthesiologist. It has to be an MD or a DO. Now, our nurses, as of 2025, our nurse anesthetists, they may be getting their doctorates in anesthesiology, but they are not MDs or DOs. So this model would not work. So, we don't want this bill to be about, professional rivalry. I hope it isn't. We talked about the fact that this might be something we might want to work on as an interim topic and see if maybe we could be the first state to allow this. But right now, there are no states in the United States that allow this. And there's a good reason for that. And we've got a lot of young people who want to come back to the state and work. We heard from a lot of them. Some of you may have been getting some emails as well. They want to come back. This is a simple bill. All we've got to do is allow our state to approve AAs, and away we go. I know some of the CRNAs have talked about, well, what if a anesthesiologist leaves the practice? Where would those AAs go? You know, there's, like I said, at least 10 hospitals in the state of Wyoming. They can go to another hospital if they'd like. But right now, we've got a lot of them that are working out of state, and they want to come back home. And they're young people, and we want them back. So I hope you will vote this amendment down. It's a good idea, it's a good thought, but it's illegal at this time. And again, I just hope that maybe we'll think about this as an interim topic and take a look at it and see if we can expand it and be the first. You know, we are the equality state. It's always great to be the first at something, but right now it's illegal. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Senator Schuler. Anybody else on the amendment before the sponsor? Yeah, Senator Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I appreciate the creativity in this amendment. I do have my doubts about this because your certified anesthesiologist assistant and your certified registered nurse anesthetist are both mid-level providers. Their training is their paths are different, but they're both mid-level providers, and I just am skeptical that at this time that this would work, and so I think the bill as written is probably the way to go.
Thank you. Anybody else before the sponsor for your second time? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and for the amendment, and without it, I'll probably have to be against the bill. We're really trying to expand healthcare access in the state of Wyoming. We should open every door. Just because you open a door doesn't mean you have to walk through it. If there are limitations, then those employers, those hospitals, they can take that into account. But we should at least open the doors, and I think that's what this amendment does. It opens the door to a conversation both within our communities, but also with the federal agencies responsible for this. And who knows, this might actually be the way to get that changed when our state as a state and other states say, no, we actually need to expand healthcare access, and these professionals can be a part of that. How can we do it better? So on and for the amendment, and with it, on and for the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and for the amendment. And it is too also the only way that I can support the bill. I was a no vote in committee, but with this amendment, I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Back to you, Senator Scott.
Mr. President, and let me say at the outset that with or without this amendment, we ought to pass this bill because it will help us. But we've had, there is objection from CMS, and CMS has been a major obstacle to efficiency in our healthcare system and to provision of quality in our healthcare system. It's a federal agency that desperately needs the attention from the new DOGE department back in Washington. We've had this trouble with them in physical therapists, where we in other states have allowed direct access to physical therapists without a doctor's prescription. You can't do it for Medicare because CMS objects. And that's been their pattern. This amendment does provide for an exception where we'd run afoul of the CMS rules because they do govern Medicare, and you have to pay attention to that, Mr. President. So that's taken care of. But I think the key here is that we need this expanded access because we're short of healthcare professionals, Mr. President. And if nobody steps forward and starts the ball rolling, we will be locked into a system that is more expensive because the professionals are using the rules to fence out other professionals. So on and for the amendment, Mr. President.
Thank you. All those in favor of Senator Scott's motion to adopt third reading amendment number 1, the Senate File 112, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. The amendment has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Any discussion on the bill? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good bringer of the bill. I think the intentions are good there. Again, I'm always go down a little bit different avenue. I think that the bill still, expands government regulation on licensing, whereas I think we ought to be going the other direction on loosening the licensing requirements. So I'm on and against the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Cole.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. On and against the bill. I want the opportunity to explain my position. It's been stated that you can have up to 4 AAs under one anesthesiologist. I liken it to the circus act where people are spinning plates and they're going back and forth and they're keeping those plates spinning. 4 is too much. I mean, 2, yeah, I think the good bringer of the bill makes a good attempt at trying to address the situation. But to tell me my life, my loved one's life, is in the hands of somebody who's split up 4 different directions at once, potentially, because that's what this allows, is too much for me. 2, maybe I can bite on 2. But 4, there's no way that anyone can keep track of this in a way that needs to be done. When I get knocked out, and I've been a few operations in my time, number 1, I hope I don't wake up during the procedure. And number 2, I hope I wake up after the procedure. But to have an anesthesiologist's concentration be split up amongst 4 people is an impossibility to do them a service that they should have for a reasonable expectation of surviving said procedure. So on and against the bill, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Scott.
Mr. President, with regard to the argument that this expands the government and the licensure, frankly, Mr. President, this loosens it. Right now, these people are not allowed to practice because they aren't licensed. And so you need, what the practical effect of this bill, Mr. President, is to loosen the amount of government regulation by allowing licensure where otherwise they're forbidden under the current law from practicing. Just the way the whole medical licensure business works. Mr. President, with regard to the 4 versus 2, you could make an argument, but as I understood the testimony in committee, and I hope the bill sponsor would correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understood that testimony, the 4 we're sort of in the middle of the pack in terms of states adopting this, and there was no evidence that the supervising of the 4 by an anesthesiologist was causing trouble elsewhere. So my judgment is we're safe on that score. So on and for the bill, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to answer one of the questions from the good senator from Rock Springs. Obviously, when I brought this bill forward, I did a lot of research, and again, there's no differences in mortality or length of stay or inpatient spending or anything else when you have AAs working with anesthesiologists. I would imagine that the 4 that they allow at CMS is mainly in our larger hospitals, probably none of them in Wyoming. We only have about 45, 50 anesthesiologists in the state, and not all of them are practicing, not all of them are hospitals. The bottom line is the language is permissive. It allows that. I doubt there probably would be one hospital in Wyoming that would allow that. But it's optional. The hospitals can have 1 to 2, they can have 1 to 1, so there's no language in this bill that mandates that you have to have that many, and that would be one anesthesiologist would be bouncing from one surgery to another. It just allows them to have that option, and I would imagine you're only going to see this in the larger cities, and so it's probably not going to be an option in Wyoming to even worry about. This is a good bill. As I've said before, it gives us an opportunity to bring our young people back. I hope you've heard some of the emails, same emails that I've gotten. And again, the testimony that we heard, at least 6 of the folks that testified have been working in other states, doing just great work, but they want to come back here. They want to live in Wyoming where they grew up. And all this bill does is it just gives them that option. And I think the good senator from Bates Creek already answered the government issue in terms of expansion. It's not an expansion. The difference here is that CRNAs, they are licensed by the nursing board, and the AAs are licensed by the medical board. That's about it. So with that, I hope you will vote for a good bill that I think will expand healthcare and give us more options. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and for this bill, and I'll just reiterate that, again, we're talking about another type of a mid-level provider, which, so CNRAs, your certified registered nurses anesthetists, and these anesthesiologist assistants are both mid-level providers. Currently in the state of Wyoming, CNRAs have the ability to be licensed because we have those statutes. This just gives that same ability for the anesthesiologist assistant to come into the state of Wyoming and to also practice, because currently there isn't any laws that allow them to practice. I think there's also, I've heard a little bit of confusion on some of the ratio and the supervision. Mid-level providers practice, some under their own license in the nursing realm. Physician's assistants practice under the license of a physician. That's one of the biggest differences between these mid-level providers. That doesn't mean that for the ratio, it doesn't mean that you would have an anesthesiologist that's split 4 ways. It's just how they're licensed and their ability of where they practice. They still have that training to be in that OR, to do certain things. There are certain things that they can and can't do with their licensure and their training that an anesthesiologist can do. That's for all mid-level providers, whether we're talking anesthesia or any other realm within the medical field. This bill in CNRAs, they are also supervised to an extent in the state of Wyoming, and their ratio is 1:6, so we're talking about a lesser ratio than CRNAs here. So just on and for this bill, it gives us an opportunity to allow anesthesiology assistants to come and practice in the state of Wyoming, along with all other providers who can practice in the state of Wyoming.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak on the bill? Question being called. Senate File 112 having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? The chief clerk will please call the roll.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 112. Anderson? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Boner? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Crago? Aye. Crum? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. French? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? No. Jones? Aye. Kolb? No. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Olson? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Pearson? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Smith? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Beitman?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 112, 29 aye, 2 no.
Senate File 112 having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 112 has passed the Senate. Senate File 116, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 116, Anti-Money Laundering, sponsored by Senator Nethercott, an act relating to crimes and offenses.
There are no amendments. Senator Scott.
Mr. President, I asked this be pulled off the consent list because I do have a question about it. Mr. President, this is a bill that creates a crime that is not new nationally, but is new to Wyoming, as I understand it, the anti-money laundering. And it's a 10-year felony, Mr. President. A fear I have with new felonies is if we put something in there that is vague, is not absolutely clear what the crime is and what the crime isn't, that we are creating the opportunity for prosecutors with an agenda to go get somebody that they don't like, or whose politics they don't like, or somebody who has made an innocent mistake and lock them up long-term. And that's a fear I think the Senate, over the years I've served here, Mr. President, has generally shared, and we've tried to be very careful about these. But we have seen nationally in the past few years abuse where there were vague crimes. And most of this, Mr. President, is perfectly all right. The first part of it, subsection B, person guilty of money laundering, that's pretty clear. My question is on page 5 in the illegal investment penalties section, where it says person required to report regarding currency transactions. Okay, those are properly defined earlier in the bill. Or suspicious transactions. So it's either or. You can get nailed for violating either one of those two. And Mr. President, I don't see in here, maybe I missed it, but I don't see a definition of what suspicious is. It's not clear to me what it is. Maybe there's enough case law elsewhere. Maybe there isn't. But I've had reservations of this bill because of that language, and it's found on page 5, line 3. So I'd like a little discussion on that point, Mr. President, because I think enacting a felony with a vague definition on at least part of it is asking for trouble.
Discussion on the bill. Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good senators, to the senator's question regarding page 5 and what is a suspicious investment and the reporting requirement associated with that. If you go to page 4, this references the federal law that these institutions are already subject to under the same standard. And so it's already a federal crime for their failure to report suspicious activity under the Bank Secrecy Act. So this is already a serious matter. It just also allows it to be a state law as well under those same federal requirements. Changing those requirements from the federal requirements create a very confusing and complex area of compliance. And so oftentimes in Wyoming law, I've seen us do it here as well, that it's prudent to sometimes just reference the federal law so that remains consistent and everyone understands what they are required to do instead of having different federal and state laws to comply with. And so the Bank Secrecy Act has been around for a long time, and there's a lot of guidance about that and specific rules about it. Not knowing the senator's question, I didn't get the definition of how it defines suspicious activity, but I can certainly provide that to the senator hereafter. But I submit to the Senate that this is not a new concept within the law associated with these entities that are subject to the Bank Secrecy Act. And so this is nothing new. To the senator's point of creating new felonies in the state, certainly important to be cautious. I think alleging that the prosecutors in this state don't have enough to do or seeking unethical practices associated with harming somebody is misplaced, but certainly always worth discussing. Our criminal code from the beginning of time has always generally placed the felony conviction of 0 to 10 years. Very, very, very rarely does a defendant get 10 years. It's always a period of years. that they serve. Sometimes none at all. Mostly it's a suspended sentence where they're given a 5 to 8 year prison sentence suspended for 5 years supervised probation. That's probably the most common sentence handed down in the state, unless the circumstances dictate differently. So the 0 to 10 actually affords all of the parties a great deal of discretion in arguing for 0 prison time or a higher end of prison time. But for all of the felonies on our books, the vast majority until recent years, where we try to weave in these new numbers for what we think subjectively makes sense for the theoretical crime in our head, I would advise against. And so the 0 to 10 is consistent with our criminal code. I think, good senators, a failure to pass this law continues to signal to sophisticated criminal organizations that Wyoming is open for business. As we know from our corporate filings, that there seems to be continued concern and evidence of that, as we know from our welcoming in of the gaming industry, which has a long history of challenges associated with organized crime and criminal activity, and they are the most sophisticated anti-money launderers in our country, in addition to how our state will be a target for drug lords and drug traffickers in order to use these gaming facilities to launder illegal money. So I urge your passage of this bill, that it would be prudent for the state of Wyoming to start defending itself against becoming a safe haven for organized activity, criminal activity.
Thank you. Senator Wright.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I'll be real brief here. My concerns with this bill is that it puts a greater burden on the individuals or banks to, prove that the money they hold isn't connected to some criminal activity. That's the part I don't like about it. So thank you, Mr. President.
Sorry. Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? Senator Scott, for your second time.
Yes. Mr. President, and first I'd like to apologize to the sponsor of the bill. Frankly, I had to read this bill several times before the just unease that I felt crystallized into a real question, and then didn't have time to get back to her on I had a question here. I believe when she says that this is reflecting federal law, I'm prepared to believe that. I've seen so many bad federal laws that are vague. And Mr. President, I don't think we need to adopt all of those. And it looks to me like maybe this is one of them, although there is a good argument that the other parts of this bill are very much needed. And unfortunately, this is third reading, Mr. President. So I do have this reservation that what is suspicious is something that many people would not understand, and that innocent people may be caught up with this thing.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Actually, the concept is very common in Wyoming. It occurs all the time. We most frequently see it in a pawn shop. So it's called kiting. It's called buying and receiving stolen property. Hey, I have this brand new cellular phone. It's worth $1,500, but I want to sell it to you for $250 because I think you're super special. That's called buying and receiving stolen property. That's called, I go steal somebody's phone, claim it's my own, and sell it to you. You can do that with goods, or you can do that with money. And so we don't have an anti-money laundering statute in this state. So the criminal actors, quite familiar with this concept, and do it all the time. And we hold our pawn shops to higher standards, and their laws specifically associated to them to make sure that they don't participate and don't get used in these transactions, which obviously they're prone to do, where I bring in property that I've stolen, take it into the pawn shop and ask them to resell it for me. And then I kind of get that laundering process started. So these criminal concepts are not new in our state and occur all the time, but as its relationship to money laundering and having sophisticated financial schemes that we are now presented with in light of our invitation of these types of industries into our state, it's important that we're ready for it. So The vast majority of the states in these United States have an anti-money laundering law with these same concepts in it. Again, this bill draft is adopted from another state that has done significant work associated with this activity. The federal law that is referenced isn't anything new. Every financial institution in this state and in all 50 states is required to comply with the Bank Secrecy Act, and they are required to report suspicious activity. This helps prevent terrorism, this helps prevent drug trafficking, this helps prevent organized criminal activity. So it's nothing new that is being presented in this bill that our financial institutions are not currently subject to now.
Senate File 116 having been read 3 separate times. The question is, shall the bill pass? The chief clerk will call the roll.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 116, Anderson. Aye. Barlow. Aye. Boner. Aye. Brennan. Aye. Case. No. Cooper. Aye. Crago. Aye. Crum. Aye. Dockstetter. Aye. Driscoll. Aye. French. No. Guru. No. Hicks. Aye. Hutchings. Hutchings. Aye. Ayed. No. Jones. Aye. Kolb. Aye. Landon. Aye. Larson. No. McEwen. No. Nethercott. Aye. Olson. Aye. Pappas. Aye. Pearson. Aye. Rothfuss. No. Salazar. Aye. Schuler. Aye. Scott. No. Smith. No. Steinmetz. No. President Beitman.
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 116, 21 aye, 10 no.
Senate File 116 having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 116 has passed the Senate. Madam Majority Floor Leader, we are at that order of business, consideration of bills on general file.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate resolve itself into committee of the whole.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Senator Landon. Wild bill.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Let's spur that horse, cowboy. Let's get to work.
Committee of the Whole, will please come to order. Committee, this is one of your great opportunities to work some Senate files. A big, long list of great Senate files. First one for our consideration is Senate File 149. Will the reading clerk please read the file?
Senate File 149, Wildlife Conservation License Plates Amendments, an act relating to motor vehicles, sponsored by Senator Pappas, was referred to Committee Number 6, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes Senators Boner, Hicks, Jones, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman.
So, Madam Vice Chairman, would you be willing to move Senate File 149 for us? My apologies. Thank you.
I move Senate File 149, Wildlife Conservation License Plates Amendment to Committee of the Whole.
Let's, Senator Pappas, would you try that one more time for us, please?
Yeah.
Do it and then keep the microphone if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 149, Wildlife Conservation License Plates Amendments. And for a explanation of this bill, I will keep it right here.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Senators, this is a pretty straightforward bill. This bill was asked by I was asked to run this bill by one of the commissioners on our Transportation Commission. This doesn't change the wildlife special license plate at all. Right now, in order to procure the plate, you have to make an application to the state and wait for the plate to come. It was thought that, actually through experience, people would come into their counties to get the license plate. They see the plate on the wall, they, oh, I want that plate. And then they would give an application to the person to get the plate. And then they would go home and it was like buyer's remorse. I don't know if I want to buy this plate because of the cost. So they thought that if the plates were available in every county, that purchasing the plate would be easier on the day of application. So that's all this bill does. You can still put in for the state, to get your plate if you want, especially for those people who have low numbers. They probably want to keep their low numbers. But this bill allows for the state to distribute plates in every county to have available. And so that impulse buying, they could sell that plate at that point. So that's all it does, is allow the counties to have the plates in their offices, and someone wants a wildlife conservation plate could pick it up on the day of application. Pretty straightforward. I stand for questions.
Any questions on Senate File 149? Any questions? All those in favor of Senator Pappas's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 149, please say aye. Any opposed, no. Senate File 149 has passed committee of the whole. Committee, we have a couple of Senate files that passed through the Committee 6, and my apologies as I took the chair on behalf of Senator Drew this morning. I will not be there to move these next two. If the Vice Chairman would be willing to make those Committee of the Whole movements, that'd be great. Senate File 152 is the next bill for our consideration. Would the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 152, Wildfire Management Task Force and State Forester, an act relating to state land, sponsored by Senator Barlow, was referred to committee. Moment, please. Was referred to committee number 6, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Boner, Hicks, Jones, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman. Do pass amended. Was re-referred to committee number 2, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senator Driscoll, Grew, Larson, Salazar, and Smith. Senator Salazar, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the Senate file. What is your pleasure? Senator Jones.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to try this for a second time here. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that Senate File 152 do pass, and I refer this over to Senator Barlow.
Okay, thank you, Madam Vice Chairman. Senator Barlow, I believe that we do have an amendment, and I'll let you handle that on the way if that's all right. Thank you. Take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, good colleagues, Senate File 152, Wildfire Management Task Force and State Forester, is a result of lessons learned this past fire season. As you know, we had unprecedented fire season in Wyoming. I happened to be visiting with one of the octogenarians in my community, and I asked this young lady, you ever seen a fire season like this before? And she said, you know, we burned 25,000 acres one time and we thought the whole world was had ended. And this year, just in my community alone, almost 200,000 acres. So, Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'll walk you through the bill quickly. Basically does three things. It amends the duties of the state forester. The state forester by Wyoming statute has responsibility for wildland fire prevention and intervention. alongside, and most importantly, alongside with our local fire jurisdictions. So I want to be clear, in no way does this bill interfere, or otherwise denigrate the role of our 70 fire jurisdictions in the state of Wyoming, fire districts and others. So the first thing you'll see, Mr. Chairman, I'll walk quickly into the bill, page 2 into page 3. These are duties that are implied because of basically historical perspective, but they're not actually explicit in statute. So what we did with this is working with fire chiefs and fire wardens from across the state in these last several months, talk about what duties the state forester actually needs to help them, to help those local districts. And these were the ones we came with. So you'll see that certainly some rulemaking authority, and then you know, employees, fire control programs, assistance trainings for those local districts, pre-positioning resources. And then if you go to the top of page 4, establishing standards for privately contracted private wildland fire resources. Some of you, if you're on the western side of the state or on the eastern side of the state, you know that getting wildfire insurance, property insurance, is getting more challenging. But some of these companies, if they are willing to do that, they put some, they have riders, if you will, or the ability to say, if you do these certain things and you pay for some private suppression efforts or prevention efforts, then we can be able to insure you. So this brings those folks into the fold, and primarily for safety reasons. When you have private resources on a fire and the incident command doesn't know what's going on with them, that's problematic. So if there's any questions on the role of and the duties of the state forester, we'd be glad to take them. The second, section 2, Mr. Chairman, is starting on page 4, and this is where there is a standing committee amendment to amend this. But this is setting up a wildfire management task force. And while this bill gets to some of the things, there's much more to be examined and done to try to actually have a complete and effective fire management system, wildfire management system. I'm not denigrating what we have. We have excellent professional and volunteer firefighters all across this state. We're working very diligent, very hard, lots of community volunteers, et cetera. But is there more things we could do? Could we do it better? Or what are the lessons we learned? And that's what this task force is wishing to try to get to. You'll see page 4, a couple members of the House, Senate, and then we have some folks that are assigned by the governor's office. And then there's a report due, et cetera. So and then there's a report due to Ag Committee and to the Joint Appropriations. And then some funding for each of these. I think I'll just go through the bill and then we'll get to the standing committee amendment if we could, Mr. Chairman. And then the section 3, section 4, Mr. Chairman, this is just refilling all of those funds that were exhausted in this fire season. Whether it's the emergency fire suppression account, borrowing authority, emergency contingency funds within Department of Homeland Security or within the governor's office, everything was exhausted. And these things take time to refill. We have to refill them, and get reimbursement from those other agencies, federal agencies, takes a considerable amount of time. So that's what this part does. Certainly, Mr. Chairman, we can have a conversation if we need to, second and third reading. This may not be necessary if some of the other bills, including the budget bill, go through. So we certainly don't want to duplicate, but better have every horse in the race, because this was a serious summer, exhausted our resources. With that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for any questions on the bill itself, and then we can get to the standing committee amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And I do think that one of the members of the committee, I reached out to the gentleman from Southern Carbon County on the standing committee amendment. Is there any questions of the sponsor on the Senate file? Okay. Senator Hicks, would you like to handle the standing committee amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I would. Mr. Chairman, I move standing committee amendment number 1 to Senate File 150. Could I have that read in, please?
Senate File 152, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 4, line 15, delete.
Okay, go ahead, Senator Hicks.
So, Mr. Chairman, I move Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 152 and ask for your favorable consideration. So it's pretty simple. We'll walk through this. So on page 4, line 15, it had 2 members of the legislature from the Senate. You go on down, 2 members for the House. We increased that, and to have geographic representation. I think it highlighted the impact in the northeast corner of the state of Wyoming, but these large stand replacing fires are happening all over the state of Wyoming, and it was the discretion of the committee to think that there would be a lot of interest in this on a regional basis, so we expanded that to 4 members from the Senate, 4 members of the House. That takes care of all the amendments on page 4. We get down to page 6. This adds 1 other entity to the task force. And with subject matter emphasis, and what this does is go in there, somebody that has expertise in the forest products industry. So typically when we have large stand replacing forest fires, a lot of the industry that they bring in to help are the timber industry, because they've got the Timcos and the skidders and all of that infrastructure and stuff. Not only that, they're pretty adept at managing forests to be able to reduce fires and build fire breaks, so we felt it was important that we have somebody that represents that forest products industry with the expertise in both how to reduce fuels, build fire breaks, and then also when you're actually in a suppression event, the impact and the type of equipment that might be available out there within the state of Wyoming. We moved the reporting date back from October 1st to November 15th on page 6, line 20. And then to accomplish for the slightly expanded committee from the legislature on page 8, line 5, we increased the budget from $25,000 to $40,000. And then on the last line, on page 11, line 14, we deleted $30 million and inserted $40 million. This is just borrowing authority of the governor in case of a catastrophic year. Now, where we come up with that number, the previous number, the 30 years, was looking at kind of a 10-year historic average. And, you know, after the last year and a couple of years like 2002 and 1988, and looking at the other states around us, this 40 million and what he currently has is still below the regional averages for states, but it just provides borrowing authority up to in case we have those. This still doesn't get us to the highest level of fire suppression costs that we've occurred in the state of Wyoming. So on and for the amendment. Stand for any questions.
Senator Hicks, thank you for that. Any discussion on the amendment? Senator Anderson.
On the amendment, I'm opposed to putting that regional requirement in there. We have a hard enough time finding people to fill these organizations, and to make it regional just makes it that much more difficult. Thank you.
Further discussion. We're on the standing committee amendment to Senate File 152. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think much of this amendment actually makes sense. I think I'll start at the top. Whether we need more legislators involved, you know, that's for the body to decide. That they'll be asking 2 more of you, or 4 of us, to be participating. So keep that in mind. And because of the timeline on this, I think we're talking about, you know, multiple meetings in the next 6 months if this bill were to pass. So I think it's a commitment. Certainly, I recognize that some of you are willing to make that commitment. I'd say the second thing is on the page 6, subject matter expert, and then forestry product industry, forest product industry folks. You know, actually, when you look at the rest of the state foresters' responsibilities and duties, it is about forestry. It is about products and that. So I think that already is contained within the duties of the state forester, and she already has, happens to be a woman at this point, but that office already has some of that expertise and connections, et cetera. So I'm not as, I mean, I guess that's take it or leave it. November 15th, October 1st is fine, takes more money. So I guess I'm indifferent about most of this, except maybe expanding the legislative thing, because really what I hope this is those fire jurisdictions that are driving this bus. They're the ones that actually know what we need. What the legislatures provide on a task force like this is a conduit to understanding the process and understanding how we can actually move something legislatively should we need so. So I don't find the legislators to be subject matter experts on the topics. but rather the conduit for which they could be considered by the full legislature if so needed. So, rather indifferent on the amendment as a whole. I'm not going to divide it because it's divisible about 5 ways. I'm not going to do that. So up or down on the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Senator Larson, are you wishing to speak on this standing committee amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would ask to divide it. I'm not sure if it can be divided that way. First Division 9 through 16, lines 9 through 16. And the remaining, that'd be Division 1, the remaining Division 2.
I apologize, Senator, I did not get that. So Division 1, you're saying line 9 through 24?
No, Mr. Chairman, 9 through 16. I'm trying to divide out the number of legislators on the committee.
Okay, so Senator, you could certainly do that, lines 1 through 8, and then Division 2 would be lines 9 through 24. Are you good with the remainder of that amendment? Just wanting to carve out the 2 versus 4?
Mr. Chairman, I think you need to include some in the bottom of it. So maybe I'm wrong. I'm still going with line 9 through 16 is Division 1, and the remainder Division 2.
Okay, that is divisible that way. Thank you for clarifying. So Division 1, Senators, is line 9 through 16. We're on the Standing Committee Amendment to Senate File 152. And lines 1 through 8 and 17 through 24 are Division 2. Does everybody follow? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think if the intention is to address the additional legislators, I think you also need lines 19 and 20 because that's increased funding to fund those additional persons. So, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not clear what my good colleague is wanting to segregate, but I think that if you want to segregate the people, additional legislators, that line 19 and 20 also, 19 to 20 also goes with that because that's additional funding to pay their per diem and mileage, et cetera. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Barlow, that's exactly right. And so, Senator Larson, it is divisible the way we stated, but is it a friendly amendment that we would include in Division 2 has a piece that has to go with lines 1 through 8. Does that make sense? Take it away, Senator Larson.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's what I did. I'll rephrase what I want.
Okay, thank you.
Division 1 is lines 9 through 16. Division 2 would be the remaining, the 1 through 8, and including 17 through the remaining, through 24.
So, Senator Larson, lines 21 through 24 relate to the overall borrowing capacity that the executive branch would have there. Lines 18 through 20 are related to the addition of legislators to that committee. Does that make sense? Do you see what's going on with the money piece there?
I still want to go with what I had. If I'm wrong, then vote me down.
Okay, let's go back to
Division 1.
Division 1, again, is lines 9 through 16. That was the motion made by the senator. The remainder will be in Division 2. So on Division 1, is there any further discussion? All those in favor of Senator Larson's motion on Division 1 to Standing Committee Amendment 1 to Senate File 152, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. No. Okay, so that Division 1 has passed. Now we're on Division 2, which is the entire remainder of the Standing Committee Amendment. Senator Larson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm on Division 2, and I would recommend a no vote on this part of the amendment. I want to knock down the legislators to 2, and I want to take the dollars down too.
Okay,
What's in the original bill.
thank you, Senator Larson. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm also opposed to that division. That takes care of the additional legislators in there, and it also gets rid of those regional requests. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Senator Hicks, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. President, I'd like to divide the division.
It is divisible.
So on Division 2A, to get to the point of the extra legislatures, 2A is going to be lines 1 through 8 and lines 18 through 20. That gets rid of,
Senator
Yeah, 17,
Hicks, line 17, Senator Hicks.
so Division 2A is 1 through 8 and 17 through 20. That gets rid of the legislatures and the extra salary. So 2B is the borrowing authority, raising that from 30 to 40 million out of the LSRA in the case of a catastrophic year. So
Okay, that is divisible. So Division 2 will be divided into 2A and 2B. Division 2A, do you want to speak to that any further, Senator Hicks? Are you good?
Mr. Chairman, just vote aye.
Any further discussion on 2A? All those in favor of Senator Hicks's motion to adopt Division 2A to Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 152, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, Division 2A has not passed. Now we are on 2B. 2B committee is lines 22 through 24. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on and for this division, this is simply borrowing authority. This is to bridge the gap between reimbursements from other agencies and actually getting resources out on the ground in a quick manner and ensuring that they are compensated for when we call them up. So I think this is prudent. Yeah, it's at $10 million more, but let's be clear, this is borrowing authority. And this past year, we exhausted it, and we'd wish we'd have had more. I hope we don't have another fire season like this, but let's at least have the tools available so that our chief executive, state forester, can execute a fire suppression plan that's meaningful for the state of Wyoming. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Case. My apologies. I saw you stand, Senator. Anything further on 2B? Senator Anderson.
On and for Division 2B, I think that's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor of Senator Hicks's motion on Division 2B to Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 152, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, no. That portion of Division 2 has passed. We are now back on Senate File 152. Is there anything further on Senate File 152? All those in favor of Senator Jones's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 152, please say aye. Any opposed, no. Senate File 152 has passed committee of the whole. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 139. Would the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 139, Trapping Requirements, Licenses, Seasons, and Setbacks, an act relating to game and fish, sponsored by Senator Dockstader. It was referred to Committee Number 6, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Boner, Hicks, Jones, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the Senate file. What is your pleasure? Senator Jones.
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that Senate File 139 do pass. And there is an amendment, a standing committee amendment, if we could get that read in.
Okay.
Senate File 139, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 2, line 1, strike.
I move Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 139. I will call on the good senator to explain this.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bring you Senate File 139, trapping requirements, licenses, seasons, and setbacks. Members of the Senate, we actually had a couple of companion bills running through on this, and the committee in their wisdom decided, let's go with the one that directly got the job done, and we laid back, put back a bill that called for certification requirements and just let that die in committee and moved this one through with the idea that this is the bill we're looking for. Members of the Senate, we had a situation last year where we had a family pet killed by a trap, and started looking at what we could do. So I went to state agency dealing with this, the commission in the state that deals with this, the department in the state that deals with this, and I said, can't we just simply use some rules and regs and get this corrected? And they asked me to actually move it forward with some statutory language, set it up so the commission can actually work with this, can promulgate the rules, establish the trap setback specifications, and that's what we do. On page 1, the opening, we take care of that. Page 2, we promulgate the rules, take care of the setbacks. And I'd like to note now the amendment that was moved allows the commission to just simply do the rules and not worry about affected entities or consultations, but take care of the rules, and the emphasis being on public lands and state lands. So it doesn't affect the private state lands. I'll come back and ask for your consideration on that amendment in just a moment, but as we go down through on page 2, we ID the people using the traps, we talk about the setbacks, we talk about the double checks, the 72-hour checkbacks. Page 3, we do the additional setbacks, and then we come to the actual key part of this legislation. Game and Fish Commission shall promulgate all rules necessary to implement the provisions of this act, and that's what we're looking for. That's what they asked for. Allow them to promulgate those rules, and so that's what we're bringing forth with that. I'll come back to the amendment now, and it's been moved. Ask for your favorable consideration and question on, call for question on the public lands part of this. It's being handled on public and state lands. Ask for your approval on the amendment.
Thank you. Well done, Senator. To the standing committee amendment, are there any questions or discussion? All those in favor of Senator Cole?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question about the setbacks. Can I have more information about just what exactly that's going to entail? I mean, what's the perceived end result of that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Dockstader?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and that's just exactly what we're allowing the commission to do, that as they promulgate the rules. So they decide where they're working from and how far out. That's what they asked in the very beginning. Allow us to handle it, but set it up with statute. So still ask for your favorable commission or favorable approval that it be approved for public and state lands on the amendment.
Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are there current rules for setbacks in place right now? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Dockstader?
Mr. Chairman, there's a note on 30-foot setbacks, but the commission says there's nothing really defined that they can go in and say, okay, is it off of this road, is it off of this trail? Let them formulate their rules and regs on this.
Anything further on the standing committee amendment? All those in favor of Senator Jones's motion on standing committee amendment number 1 to Senate File 139, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. Okay, standing committee amendment number 1 has passed. We're back on the bill. Senator Dockstader, anything else?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we found out in committee, we don't have this isolated incident that we were experiencing. There are other incidents across the state where people have had injured or pets that killed, and we're just simply, in this increased use of the outdoors, we're asking that the commission and the state agency dealing with this, to let them set some rules, let them get around the state, hold some public hearings, and then put something together. And that's what they asked me in the very beginning. When I said, simply, can we have some rules and regs to deal with this? They said, put it in statute, let us go get this job taken care of. And that's what we're doing here today, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Senator Dockstader. Any further discussion on Senate File 139? Senator Crum.
Just a question of clarification. How did we end on 30 feet versus 50 feet or 75 feet or something like that on the setback?
Okay, anything further before we go back to the sponsor? Senator Anderson, and then we'll go to Senator Steinmetz. No? We won't go to Senator Steinmetz. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, we've had some of these instances in our county, and that request for those setbacks, I don't know how far they set it back, but I do want to leave that to Game and Fish, how far they make those setbacks. And the setback is from a residential area or a property that you'd have your animals in. And I think they'll make the setbacks far enough that it'll make a difference that all of our dogs don't get caught in traps. Thank you.
Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, and that's just it. The commission says allow us to get this taken care of after we go around the state, to hold some hearings and establish this. We don't need to get caught up in just one specific set of feet. They're saying, let us get this handled so that we can stop these incidents we've been having. I was surprised that folks showed up and said, yeah, we've had this happen and it's been a problem.
Senator Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't going to weigh in, but having been involved heavily in this in the past, I have pretty grave concerns on this. You know, watching the groups, nearly all the dogs that end up in this problem are off leash, off the trail, which is against the law right now. And the people come in and they're extremely upset because they're out with their dog, not following rules, and they've done it. And I can assure you, should we pass this, they're instantly going to be at the commission and they want setbacks off every trail they'll tell you they don't, but I'm going to tell you it's there to come. And in Wyoming, proudly, we have a constitutional right to hunt, fish, and trap in Wyoming. It's a base right. And if you're on public ground and you have your dog or animal legally on a leash that is supposed to be on, the odds of it getting caught in a snare or a trap are somewhere near zero. And I think we see it everywhere else. It's called creep. I believe the commission right now has some ability to do quite a lot of this. And there was testimony to that without entering into this part. If you read the rest of this statute, we're inserting something that basically has to do with equipment and tools used to trap, and now we're changing the intent of that section of the statute. I encourage you to resist this and have them come back with something that works a little better. It's fair both ways. It doesn't just keep take until you no longer administratively trap. Thank you.
Senator Scott.
Well, Mr. President, I think the problem is wider than that. I've had a problem. I had dogs that went irrigating with me. Naturally, it was on my place. I let them run free. And the neighbor allowed a trapper in that set a snare right on the property line and caught one of my dogs. Fortunately, I noticed that she hadn't come back, went and found her before too much harm was done. But there needs to be some protection somewhere against some of this trapping that is a threat to dogs that are behaving perfectly reasonably and perfectly on where they're entitled to behave they were. So, Mr. Chairman, on and for the bill, I think we need to start doing some things on this road.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I hope we'll pass this bill forward. You know, there's some fine people that are caught up in this, and I'm just convinced the commission will do a good job of weighing all the sides on this. Because something's a constitutional right, doesn't mean that it's absolute, or that means we can set a trap or a snare anywhere, public parks, municipalities. It doesn't work like that. All these rights are balanced. I'm not convinced, Mr. Chairman, that of the assertion that everywhere that we're talking about, a dog is supposed to be on a leash. I would like more information about that, because there's land under different management and all different rules. So I think that's kind of out there to say that every one of these places where these traps are, the person with a dog that's running loose is violating the law. So I think we need balance. We've got lots of people that enjoy our great outdoors.
Senator Rothfuss?
Am I in trouble? You're
My,
not going to send him to kick my butt, are you?
my apologies, Senator, please continue.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I was just pointing out that non-consumptive recreation is growing and growing and growing. We all love our Wyoming outdoors. What happens if it's not a dog? You just cut it off. Well, I guess that's it for me. Who says it's going to be a dog? What about a child?
Thank you, Senator Case. Further discussion? Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really appreciate the chance to have a further conversation on this bill. You know, folks, there's getting to be a lot of us. And unfortunately, we're pushing up the foothills and we're populating the universe out there. And as the senator from just over the hill from me pointed out, you know, we're coming more and more into contact with things that never used to be contacted before. But in the case of this bill, the reason I think it might be the best approach that we could come up with is that it allows for a good discussion, a good group of people to come together and strike that balance that you just heard about from the Fremont County Senator. We heard testimony in the committee, senators, that there were parking lots out there. Somebody pulled into a parking lot and their dog jumped off the pavement nearby the parking lot in an area and was hit with a snare. It seems to me pretty reasonable that we would say, well, if we've got a public parking lot, maybe we want a little bit of a setback off of that, rather than having a snare right there that could catch one of the dogs that jump out of the back of the truck. Seems reasonable to me. Public trails that go all the way up certain parts of the world, and we specified just now with the standing committee amendment that we're gonna say, no, it's gotta be state land, and we're not talking about private property where they shouldn't be in the first place. We're talking about state land, public land. There are certain trails that the game and fish and whoever works with them might want to say, you know what, that trail is used by a lot of folks, and we've got a lot of folks enjoying the outdoors around Wyoming. So there might be an area where we would want to say setbacks are appropriate. I couldn't agree with the senator from Fremont County more. You know, nothing is absolute, and that's the job we do here, is to try to balance, try to strike a balance. And I think this bill has the opportunity to create that for us. We can always come back in. If we don't like what ends up happening, we can always change that. But I think the approach that the senator took is a good one, and I hope you'll support the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Landon. Further discussion on Senate File 139, trapping requirements, licenses, seasons, and setbacks. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I don't want to belabor this anymore, but at some point I'd like, maybe on second reading, an explanation of the repealer, because the repealer seems to be a very different issue in my mind, and I'd like some thoughts on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Any further discussion on 139? For discussion, seeing none, question up. Back to you, Senator Dockstader, to close it up.
Thank you. When I can get with the question on the repealer, I can take that to him, but I remind everyone, this is the commission asking that allowing them to get this set up and address it individually. It's not a mandate, it's just simply allowing the commission to work and find that balance that we're looking for as people enjoy their pets in the great outdoors. Ask for your support.
Thank you, Senator Dockstetter. Anything further? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Jones's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate File 139, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 139 has passed the committee of the whole. Madam Majority Leader.
Chairman, I request that I move that the committee of the whole beg leave to rise and sit again.
You've heard the motion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That motion has carried. Mr. President.
Do we have any reports from standing committees? Or any messages from the House? None? Okay. Well, Madam Majority Floor Leader, that clears the desk.
Mr. President, I move that we stand recessed until 2:15. 2:15.
2:15. Announcements. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Senate Labor, Health, and Social Services Committee will meet upon noon recess at 12:40 to consider two bills, Senate File 155, International Physician Licensing, and Senate File 172, Physical Therapy Licensure Compact. Again, that's 12:40 in room W110. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Anderson.
Mr. President, your favorite committee, Senate Minerals, Business and Economic Development, will meet today about 12:40 also in Capitol Extension Room W4, and we'll hear two bills. Senate File 92, Make Carbon Dioxide Great Again, No Net Zero, and Senate File 134, Industrial Siting Wildlife Mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 5, Ag Public Lands, will meet tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock to address two bills, Senate File 196, Second Amendment Protection Act amendments, and Senate File 192, High Plains Research Station and Arboretum Historic Site 2, if time allows. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Olson.
Committee number 1, Judiciary, will meet here at 12:30 upon this noon recess in W002 to consider 3 bills, Senate File 22, Ground for Termination of Parental Rights Guardianship, Senate File 100, Child Witnesses Courtroom Procedures, and Senate File 180, Supplemental Budgets Limitations.
Thank you. Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Travel, Recreation, and Wildlife Cultural Resources Committee 6 will meet tomorrow morning, Tuesday, at 8 a.m. in W4. That's the Wind River Room. We'll take up Senate File 132, Protecting Critical Infrastructure and Systems from Drones. Senate File 164, Pari-mutuel Rodeo Definitions, and Senate File 170, Grizzly Bear Management Prohibition.
Thank you. Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Committee number 3, Revenue, will meet at 12:35 in room W6 to take up Senate File 163, Partial Tobacco Products Tax Repeal, and 177, Primary Residence Property Tax Fund. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Vice President.
Mr. President, the Senate Appropriations will meet at 12:30 in room 113. We'll be going over Senate File 141, United States Marine Corps Corporal Seth Rasmussen Memorial Highway, Senate File 169, Strategic Investments and Projects, Senate File 189, Uniform Commercial Code Investments, Senate File 191, State Fund Proxy Voting and Pecuniary Investments, and finally, SJ 11, Supporting Anti-ESG Litigation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more announcements? You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All opposed, no. Senate will stand recessed until 2:15 p.m.